All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another Motivators podcast. Today we have Kara Lecklider with us. She's the Director of Sales for Motivity. And the topic today we're talking about is technology adoption. And then we have a special guest, Kyle Quinn, which I'll go ahead and Kyle, please introduce yourself for our guests.
Sure. I'm the president of the organization that I work for, which has about 300 employees, serving over a couple hundred kids each day in the state of Indiana. And I've been in the field of ABA for over 18 years, 14 of those years as a BCBA, and somewhat recently switched over to Motivity software.
Yes. It was. Thank you so much. And then Kara, the reason why we have Kara here is one of the things that really stood out to us during the process of working with you, Kyle, was the level of detail and expertise in how you evaluated Motivity when we were going through the process of selection, but also just overall how you evaluated and approached that process of technology adoption in general, and really looking at data and evaluating and screening different tools. I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily have like a very clear and defined process for that. And I think this discussion is, we really wanted to kind of give some tools to organizations that need to select software, but don't really have a defined process and the importance of that. But I'm going to turn it over to Kara, because Kara and you worked a lot together on that. And I think it would be interesting to hear more about that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Emily. So just to set the stage a little bit, Kyle, can you just tell us about the role that software plays within your company? What kind of technology are you using in the day-to-day, and what is really required on that end?
Yeah, we use Samsung Galaxy tablets. We have one for each RBT in our company, and we even have one assigned to telehealth clinicians like BCBAs in our company as well. The software helps us not only collect clinical data, but helps us get that data into a practice management software as well that helps us with back-end operations. So getting information, daily session notes or SOAP notes into the system and software. And the software really helps us when it comes to audits from payers, whether it be Medicaid or commercial insurance payers as well.
And how did you know when you obviously embarked on this journey to make some switches with your software? How did you know it was time, or how in general do you know when it's time to either adopt a new software system entirely or make the switch from something that you're currently using to something else?
Sure. So in the first 9 years of my career, we used paper and pencil. Of course, that career was 2005 and the 9 years after that. So we saw a need for technology, and we saw especially a need for technology emerging in the field of ABA. With the increase in insurance and Medicaid audits, that became even more of a realization for our company. We were spending hours copying or scanning and faxing paper, and we were having file cabinets full of paper, keeping data for 7 years or longer for patients. And that just wasn't feasible logistically or economically. So we switched to a software and used that software for about 8 years. That software actually had glitches for us and was taking up a lot of staff time with the errors and glitches and time it took to fix all those, not importing data, not charting things correctly. And so we knew it was time for our staff's benefit, but from a time and cost perspective as well, we needed to find a software that was not only more efficient, but gave us all the tools we needed to do our clinical session notes, our clinical data collection, clinical charting, and clinical audit preparation and information pulling for those audits as well.
It's amazing to think about just in the span of all of our own careers of how we all started out with the paper pencil and now we're in this world of technology and it's so different. I used to always refer to my Thursday nights as my data entry and Grey's Anatomy nights because I would sit and watch Grey's Anatomy and, take all of my paper data and put it all together and write out everything. It's funny how even in our own careers we've seen such a shift. So now I know just from talking during our time together when you were evaluating Motivity that you were evaluating many systems at once. So I can only imagine that on your end, that means you were sitting in demos, making comparisons between the different demos. How did you handle all of that? And really, I mean, to be fully transparent here, it's really when you're giving a demo, it's a sales pitch. So on your end, as a clinician, as a business owner, how are you taking in these different sales pitches and getting the information that you really need?
Yeah, I think that preparation is key. So I set aside about 100 hours and demoed 24 softwares. And I created a list of about 86 points or questions or items that our company needed to be successful. And I took that through a survey of people across different parts of our company, both clinical people and non-clinical people, such as billing department, managers of each of our locations as well, and put that together. And then, of course, not only looked for that within the software, but asked questions of the software companies to see what they offered and what they didn't offer. I think part of that too is reviewing critiques or reviews from other companies within the United States or even Canada for that matter. And I narrowed down those softwares to 3 softwares, but at least one of those other softwares had a lot of reports of glitches and errors and time spent on making it work, frankly, which was the software, like the software that we already had. And I didn't want to go from one frying pan to the other, so to speak.
Yeah, wait, I just want to understand clearly. So you spent 100 hours evaluating systems?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. And you said, what was the number you said? Did you say a number of systems you looked at?
24.
Oh, 24 systems. So did you, it sounds like you had, so you did a survey of your staff to see like what are the features and characteristics of a system that were important to them. Could you give some examples?
Sure. So our clinical staff wanted some foundational parts, right? They needed to graph data. They needed to pull data. They needed to pull things, including daily session notes or SOAP notes for audits, for example, too. And they needed to have a system that was quick and reactive in nature. So they didn't want a system that lagged on data. So imagine an RBT is taking data on a kid's listener responding goals. They hit the data button, and then 48 seconds later, it finally syncs with the system. And we were having that issue with our previous software. One of the things that we really liked about Motivity system is that it was very quick and very responsive.
Yeah, I often say on Motivity, it almost feels like you're collecting paper pencil data because that's the speed of just quickly jotting it down. And we've all been there with that lagging and
yeah,
we get
really spoiled when we're in Motivity and we go to a different website that we're doing something else that's related to tracking something, and we're like, this is like, it's like so slow, but it's not really that slow. It's just we're so used to Motivity. So you were tracking all of these questions and characteristics. How did you track it? Did you create like this master spreadsheet, or how did you do that?
I did, in fact. You're exactly right. I had a spreadsheet with the 86 features or questions that I was looking for and filled it in as a column for all 24 softwares.
Wow. Do you have a lot of people asking you for that?
I haven't offered that up, but I definitely do promote the ease of use, reliability, and the features and benefits of Motivity on social media, including ABA or BCBA Facebook groups, for example.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate that, because that's
Sure.
like that's the best compliment that we could get, is when people are just going out there and talking positively about the system. So thank you so much. Something that I come across when I'm meeting with organizations that are looking for different software systems is they don't really know the questions that are important to ask. They might get really like focused on like, oh, do you have this very specific feature, but they're not really asking these overarching questions that are really more key to running their day-to-day operations.
Mhm.
So in your opinion, what are some of those questions that could really help you hone in on, is this going to be a system that's going to work with my organization?
Yeah, that's a great question and point, Kara. So what I think is important is asking a question about not all the features and benefits of the system, but what features and benefits the system doesn't have quite yet. And then secondarily to that, I think that finding out about the customer service support and the responsiveness of the customer service is really important. I deleted about 8 of the 24 organizations just because of customer service issues that were widely reported with those companies.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have an issue and you can't get it fixed in a timely manner, or at least an answer to your question, it doesn't really behoove you to have that system within your company.
That's for sure. And were you getting those answers through the demos, or it was through your research on finding the feedback in the Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I found it more helpful to find feedback through the Facebook groups because I didn't want the biasness coming from the demo companies themselves. So I
Yeah,
wanted to get secondary types of opinions basically from people all around the country and even outside the country.
that's really neat. And you already spoke a little bit about this, about the ROI, because obviously, I mean, even just in the evaluation process, you put in 100 hours. So for companies that are really struggling to see the value of switching systems, what might you suggest to them? What might be your words of wisdom there?
Yeah, so return on investment is very important for an organization. And, in business, time is money, and everybody's time is important, and everybody's busy in an organization typically. So, what I found is that, yes, I spent 100 hours narrowing it down to 3 finalists, so to speak, for software, and then ultimately chose Motivity. But I spent about another 40 hours on those 3 softwares after the 100 hours.
Wow.
But the Motivity software, along with our practice management system, saves our staff collectively at least 100 hours per week.
Wow.
So, yeah, if it's saving 5,000 man hours a year, it was worth my 140 hours of initial investment time.
Oh, how do you calculate that time that's being saved?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did is took kind of an A/B comparison, and we calculated and tracked for a month before we changed softwares how much time each person was spending on the previous system. And that included glitches, contacting customer service, um, things not working basically, and having to wait on the system. And then we took data after we fully trained and implemented the software and compared those 2 data points. And that 100 hours is probably shared across 20 to 30 people, but still saving some people 2-3 hours a week on average can give them back 8 or 10% of their week. And especially for our clinicians, we found the return on investment, not just from a time perspective, but the system more than pays for itself because they're able to increase their billable time and their billable hours, which generates more revenue for the company.
I never even thought of that, because even when you're looking at system response time, if you're doing something as a clinician like building a program or evaluating data, and you set aside 30 minutes to do that and the system is lagging, it could end up taking an hour, what, could have been done in 30 minutes otherwise.
Yeah, and out of our 3 clinical directors, they were spending on average about 1 hour apiece with glitches with the previous system, having to talk to their technical team or their support team because they were so advanced things that administrative staff support people weren't able to handle those. So you have higher earners in your organization who are having to do tasks that you would want more of an administrative assistant or even potentially an IT support person to take care of. So you've got a higher cost of maintenance and usability going on when you get to situations like that. And as you can imagine, if 3 clinical directors work an average of 120 hours a week, 3 hours a week may not sound like a lot, but that is 150 hours a year. And especially if you have people who are billing part of their time, that can start to add up to thousands of dollars a year.
And now I know you're coming fresh out of the onboarding and implementation phase, and that's really what a lot of companies are scared about, is making that switch and getting the buy-in from the staff and having to completely overhaul what you're currently doing.
Mhm.
How did that all go? Did you find that it was worth your while? I mean, it sounds like it based on what you said previously, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely worth it from a cost and time savings perspective, but it definitely takes time and it takes a lot of communication. And it takes people from different areas, not just clinical people, but even support people like administrative assistants or people like myself in an administrative role to really support, communicate, and constantly update people. So not only did we have a daily update email each day, we had a weekly meeting as well during the implementation phase. And although that took time, they more than got it back over the long run.
Mhm. And then, I know during our time together, during the demo process, you did include people from throughout your organization. So it wasn't just clinicians. You did also have developmental therapists in the demos. And we did do a few different meetings together. And then you had even provided me feedback on how to best talk to all the different members within your organization.
Mhm.
How did you make the decision on who to include, what kind of information they needed, and so on?
Yeah, so I think organizations do well to include all the stakeholders. Like you said, not only are we a multidisciplinary clinic having ABA speech and occupational therapy, for example, as well as diagnostic testing, but we don't want to choose a software that works for the ABA people, and then the speech therapists and occupational therapists are all up in arms and frustrated. So we needed a software that worked across different disciplines and did all the things we needed it to do. And Motivity had several features, including customization of templates for SOAP notes or daily session notes, for example, that worked really well.
I thought it was really nice to have everybody included, and it was actually something that not many other organizations had done, which is why I was so grateful to get your feedback on how to better address the needs of the different stakeholders throughout our time together. And so then it just made me think that this would be a really helpful thing for other groups to bring in different sides of the business rather than just like the main decision maker and the chief clinical officer or something like that.
Yeah, and I think people need to keep in mind that it's a process. You have to proactively communicate 30, 60 days ahead of time, and you have to communicate through the transition and the implementation phase. And then we actually have a 1, 3, and 6 month follow-up meetings as well. So, no system is going to be absolutely perfect all the time for everyone. But in those meetings, and one thing I've liked, which I thought when we chose the software and has played out well, is that Motivity is very responsive to request features for the software. And so software is always developing, and we understand that all softwares are like that in this space. And what we like is that Motivity is not only open to those, but responsive to those, and typically gives us an estimated time frame for when things will be improved or implemented as well.
you were talking a little bit about the evaluation process and the questions you were asking. Could you tell some of our listeners things to look out for, like when they're evaluating, like red flags, and possibly when they're evaluating, and then maybe on the other side, those green light moments, like when you're looking and evaluating a system in a company, because it's not only the system that you're evaluating, you're also evaluating the company. What are those red flags and what are those like green light moments that they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think one is any company that implements software has to be able to afford it, right? So you have to think about what's the cost going to be for your organization, but is that cost going to be easily covered with how much time you're going to save? There's still people doing paper and pencil data, which still amazes me. Maybe that's just because I left it 9 years ago, but you have to look at how much it's going to cost you now and in the future, and you have to understand how much time it will probably save you so that it essentially pays for itself. And we've found that with Motivity. Motivity's saving us thousands of dollars a year for our organization in time and obviously increased billing on the flip side of that for clinicians. So that was a green light moment for me. And I'm responsible for budgets and spending and things like that in our organization. With 300 employees, you can imagine that's a pretty sizable budget and things of that nature. So I think some red flags in softwares is when a company shies away from talking about its downtime or time that the software doesn't work, because that means that they want to hide it perhaps, or that it's higher than they want to let on. I think another thing that was a red flag in some softwares is if it doesn't work in the demo, it's not going to work in the real world. And I had several demos, probably at least 4, where the software didn't even work in the demo phase. So that is pretty telling too. I think you also have to ask about the company that you get service from. How large is it? How many people does it have? How many of those people are in customer support type roles? What's their track record been and where they see themselves going? Because there are software companies out there that have 16 employees, for example, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how are you going to support an organization with 300 employees when you yourself only have 16 and your software has only been around for 8 or 10 months? Well, that's not usually long enough to work out the glitches. And nobody usually wants to be the guinea pig either.
That's a really good point too. Very interesting about the software not working during the demo. Something that I always say, and I always keep an eye on this now, is so on Motivity, we demo on our actual production site, which is, I think, really unique, but it gives you a glimpse of how our system is working at that moment. And also that we're confident enough that at any given time, we're going to show you the actual product. It just in numbers of demos I've done, always pay attention to that URL, because sometimes you'll see that they might even be on another server entirely, and that to me is a red flag, because I'll typically ask about that. You know, are you on a sandbox site? Why are you on the sandbox site? Sometimes it could be just the way things are set up, but it's just important information to have.
Yeah.
How do you
I think the
tell
responsiveness of the organization is key too when you're going through the demo phase. A couple providers got nixed, so to speak, because their responsiveness was very slow. And my father always taught me no one will be nicer to you than the time they're trying to sell you something. And so if they're not responsive and helpful when they're trying to sell you the product, they're definitely not going to be helpful and responsive after they've sold you the product, in my opinion.
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, Kara, I was going to ask you, because you've told me this before about the sandbox. How do you tell in the URL that they're in a sandbox and not in the actual production site?
It'll usually have something in it that gives it away. Like it'll be like /demo, or at the beginning it'll be like demo dot whatever. Like there's usually something in the URL that gives it away that it's not the production site.
Oh, okay. That's useful to know.
Yeah. So I think that's really unique about Motivity, that we demo on our production site, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. This is really a good information, Kyle. Thank you so much. I'm so intrigued by your spreadsheet of 84 attributes. What's the attribute on there that you think people would be most surprised about?
I think the integration with practice management software is really key for an organization that's medium to larger size and really trying to automate processes as well. It's hard to run a business on Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, for example. No one likes to have 9 tabs open to make their day flow, and they really want software to encompass a lot of different things. And I think for Motivity especially, not only does it integrate with practice management, but as a standalone product, it allows you to pull reports and pull data and pull graphs and charts and things of that nature very quickly, easily, and independently. Because, you know, spending time on insurance audits, for example, is non-productive time for clinicians. And sometimes clinicians have to get involved in pulling those audits, even though you have billing staff that can help or administrative support staff that can help. Usually clinicians have to review some of that and make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted as well. And I think one thing I was going to talk about is I think that technology is ever evolving, and I actually oversee the couple IT technicians that we have in our company. But I think technology in the past has really come about. Softwares like Motivity have really increased. Again, I trialed 24 of them. And I think in the present, if you're not using software and you're using paper and pencil, I think you're way behind the times, quite frankly. And I think you're not realizing that you're spending more time and thus more resources and money by not using software. And the future of the field of ABA is more audits, harder to get authorization, better tracking of outcomes, even, you know, quality-based reimbursements potentially. And you're not going to do that on Excel spreadsheets, handwritten notes, standard acceleration charts in pencil or pen for these days. And the software is more responsive, analyzes fast, pulls fast, and shares information quickly. And parents, I think, really want to see what's in their kids' programs as well. And, you know, are you going to pull a binder or a big pile of papers, sift through them with a parent whenever they want to see it? Because some parents want to see it rarely, some want to see it occasionally, and some want to see it frequently. And software like Motivity, we don't have to spend any time. We just give them access and they can look at it whenever they want. And when people have records requests from parents especially, we just point them right to the software, and we don't spend the time or resources having to provide that either.
I know a lot of people who still use paper pencil, and I agree with you. It surprises me, but there are a lot still out there. And I talk to them often when they're coming to evaluate software systems.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest concerns is making that mental shift from having that tangible item to
Mm-hmm.
now having all of their business operations, like, you know, up in the server somewhere.
Right.
And then so many questions about what happens if, you know, all of these if scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think one of the things you have to look for, and maybe a green light too, is asking, and one of the couple of questions I asked was, how do you back up your data? Where is your data? Is it on a server farm in North Carolina? Is it on a server in India? Where is it? And how do you have a residual backup for that data? Because losing data is as if the service never happened when it comes to insurance companies. And if you can't provide the information to an insurance company, they'll recoup the money you paid that they paid you. And then that's a lot more costly than having electronic data collection software. One thing I pose to people, and one of the main reasons we switched away from paper, is not only the time and it took to file it and the space it took to have, you know, a row of 18 filing cabinets, but what if there were a fire? You know, what if a tornado hits your building? What if somebody doesn't put data in the right folder? And what if people accidentally shred something or lose something? There have been many a times where people have reported finding HIPAA data in trash cans or dumpsters, and you have to worry about HIPAA compliance. Well,
Yeah. One of the moments that sticks with me is I was walking out into the parking lot and I had a whole folder of data, and it was raining, pouring rain out, and it started flying around and landed in puddles. And I had to pick up every single piece of soaking wet paper, go home and dry it off with a hair dryer and make sure I had it all. So I'm like, let's not idealize the paper situation either. It's not perfect. Far
well,
from.
and if you technically look at it, transporting your car is a HIPAA violation.
That's true.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, we have multiple clinics in our state, and we had to buy lockable fireproof safes to put in people's car to maintain HIPAA compliance,
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
and had a whole procedure just for that before we switched to electronic data. And it's kind of like, well, I need that data because Johnny transferred from this location to the other. Oh, somebody's coming out to your location in 12 days. We'll bring it to you then. It's like, well,
Right.
he starts Monday. Well, we don't have anybody coming that way, so we can't share the data with you. With electronic data, it takes about 3 minutes to transfer that kid's file from this location to that location, and from these staff to that staff.
I have one of the things you were talking about made me think about this organizations that are choosing technology. I think there's this notion that a technology should be an end-to-end solution, that they want to have one place that they can go to do all of the things, the practice management, the schedule, the clinical data, the session notes. What I guess I'm curious to you, like, did you consider that? And in the end, why did you choose a best-in-class integrated solution?
Sure. So we definitely considered all those things and many more. Like I said earlier, time is money, and we really looked at software that was going to save us time and, frankly, frustration, because you don't want to have HR problems or complaints because of a software that isn't even yours, sort of thing. And then remind me what the final part of your question was.
Why did you choose, instead of an end-to-end solution, like an all-in-one? Why did you in the end choose integrated systems?
Yeah, so we found that Motivity met all of our criteria for our clinical side and our clinical data. And I don't mind sharing, it was the only software of the 24 we trialed that did. And those are our needs, and everybody's needs are a little different. But the integration with a practice management software was very helpful as well. And we liked that the systems not only talk to each other, but that they share data between them. And again, as important as clinical data software is, like Motivity today, I think that practice management software is going to keep getting adopted in organizations in the future. And as Kara talked about, she knows a lot of people with paper data. I don't know hardly anyone with paper data still, and I know dozens of behavior analysts from different parts of the country. I think the adoption and penetration of electronic data software is only going to increase more and more. And we have two big trends that I think are going to lead to that. One is the rise of telehealth behavior analysts and telehealth clinical services. You have more and more telehealth clinicians practicing today. Well, are you going to mail files to them if they live 4 states away? No, that doesn't make sense. Are you going to share 96 spreadsheets so they know what's going on in your organization? Well, that's not very effective either. And I think the other big trend in our field is the merger and acquisition of companies as well. And larger companies are acquiring smaller companies for, the most part. Well, larger companies are usually going to have a clinical software that they use, and they're going to have the clinics that they buy or take over use that software. And they're not usually really keen on having software that doesn't work reliably. So they've probably invested a lot of hours in finding a good software as well. And don't get me wrong, sometimes those softwares are different, but usually a large company will adopt the one that works best, even if it's changing the larger company's software, in my experience and from things that I've heard. Because large companies don't want to lose $1 million a year because of a software in time and resources.
Something that you said that just stuck out to me, something about HR complaints about a software that's not even yours. Has I'm assuming that's happened. Are there staff that are just like upset because of software issues?
Yeah, so supervisors, even clinical supervisors, for example, is if you have to have a 30-minute conversation 2 times a week with RBTs or other behavior analysts because software's not working, you're wasting dozens of hours a year of your time for your clinical staff. But then you have people making complaints to non-clinical staff in your company too, like HR, your billing staff, your clinical administrative assistant, for example. And we have our clinical administrative assistant handle a lot of glitches and issues that occurred, especially with the previous software. And she was spending a lot of time on that. And, even though she was lower compensated than a clinician might be, it was still adding up. And we knew that we were sucking a lot of time out of our staff, that we knew there had to be a better solution. And even if that solution took a few months and dozens of hours to get implemented, we knew in the medium and especially the long term, it was going to more than pay off and pay for itself, frankly.
Yeah. And then it's even looking at job satisfaction, right?
Sure.
Because if there's a certain tool that's baked into a staff member's day to day and they're frustrated or it's not allowing them to do what they need to do, then all of a sudden that translates to them not liking their job or potentially being upset with the company for having made that decision. I'm just that just really stuck out to me about how it's so much more than just finding a software that does what you want it to do. It's about the culture you're building, the organization you're building, and all of that. Correct me if I don't mean to be like putting words into your mouth, but it's kind of the reflection that just...
You're absolutely right. In fact, I think the biggest regret I have about changing softwares is that we didn't do it sooner. And when I came into the role that I'm in at this company, that was one of probably the top 2 or 3 complaints or concerns in the company, was how glitchy and ineffective and time consuming the other software was. And quite frankly, it was really irking people. And I think why it irked people more than anything is that they didn't feel like the company was hearing them or was taking it serious enough to look at changing softwares. Because when you have to get buy-in for changing softwares, no matter if it's your clinical data software or your payroll and HR software, for example, you have to get buy-in from people because it's going to be a fair amount of work to change from one to the other. There's reasons that payroll companies average very long tenures with companies staying with them, because the number one thing reported is they don't want to put the resources into changing.
Absolutely.
And so you want to find a good software. And the one we used previously, we used for 8 years. We probably should have used it for 3 or 4, quite frankly. But once I took surveys and I talked to a lot of people from different departments, especially the clinical department, we just knew it was time to move on, and that we couldn't keep spending 100 hours a week spread across our company trying to make a software work. In our mind, their software was probably at least 2 or 3 years away from working how it needed to work today.
Yeah, and I think also your insights into the future of the field, but also in the field of the adoption of technology is spot on. This is not going away. Systems are going to constantly be coming onto the scene. Legacy systems are going to be fading out, and people are going to need to stay on top of technology. And your advice, I think, is super valuable to organizations that are looking at this, because even though you've been on electronic systems for 9 years. That's still very new to our industry, is this wide adopted technology, electronic data collection, and how it's impacting our field. I mean, if you think about it, BTs now, there's BTs and that never experienced the binder, like that's what therapy looks like now. Therapy looks like my tablet. It has my goals and programs. And if it's not working, you can't do your job. Like you don't have a backup binder there to do the work, and things have to work and be consistent and reliable. And we appreciate your advice to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.